Welcome back to MMA Al Dente. I am the guy who only owns like 4 shirts, so leave me the fuck alone. I'm here to recap UFC on ESPN 51. I think that's what it is. Luque versus RDA. I'll start at the top and I'll finish with Santos versus Miller. Luque and RDA, this was a close enough fight, but I still thought the right guy clearly won. I think it would have been a bad decision if RDA got the nod, but he made some of those early rounds pretty close. It's just in the end, Vicente Luque won, and he won with size and wrestling. He won the exact fight I thought RDA was going to win against Luque. But he was the guy that won the wrestling battle, Vicente Luque. I do think he has leveled up here in the past year. Maybe not in the most exciting of ways, but this was still one of the overall last results I expected from this fight. I knew Luque would score points, but to see him scoring points like that against RDA and winning the fight in that way was, again, a pleasant surprise. Vicente Luque did get the better of RDA, again, even though some rounds were close, round 1, round 3, round whatever the fuck. But overall, Vicente Luque neutralized RDA against the cage, kind of played the big man, like Kamaru Usman told him. He trains with Usman, who had beaten RDA by bullying him. And he said, Usman said to Luque, you're going to be the bigger man. You're going to have a distinct strength advantage on the inside. And he did, and that was the story of the fight pretty much. Vicente Luque is a killer, but here he was fighting a guy who is a savvy veteran and very difficult to finish and, almost impossible to submit. I know Cowboy armbarred him in a horseshit grappling match, with the fucking whatever. But Vicente Luque, he found another way to win. It wasn't the most thrilling, kind of like Corey Sandhagen beating Rob Font, but in a lot of ways it was very impressive. So, great win for Vicente Luque. And for RDA, you know what? He was very competitive with Vicente Luque. Didn't look bad over the course of 5 rounds. Just ran into the same hurdle he hasn't been able to overcome at the welterweight division against some of the bigger and, of course, better guys in the division. And it's a loss we'd seen before. But his chin didn't fail here. And, of course, he wasn't submitted. So he's still looking pretty healthy. Just a little older, a little slower, and older, young, or whatever. He was always going to have difficulty with these bigger, stronger welterweights. But here, I thought he would have been winning the wrestling battle with Luque. I thought he would have been a little faster, and Vicente Luque slowed him down. So, tough loss, familiar loss, but for Vicente Luque, this was an exceptional win in a lot of ways, even though it wasn't so fucking thrilling. That brings us to Hakeem Dawodo versus Cub Swanson. This was a bad decision. I'd have to watch the fight again before I commit to the word robbery, because it's all about, are you in the realm of winning 2 rounds? And Cub might have been. I remember thinking, I think it was the end of round 2, he really poured it on in the final, seconds. And that's always impactful with, at least one moron judge. But Hakeem Dawodo got the better of Cub. He was winning. He was the faster striker, the better striker, kicking his legs, which leg kicks will never be appreciated like punches will. That's just the nature of, fighting, I guess, or whatever, judging fighting. But Hakeem got the better of Cub, and the decision should have went the other way. I think it was unanimous, too. I think it was a unanimous decision. And you know what? I'm happy about it. Cub Swanson, he's a savvy veteran, approaching 40 years old, and he's always been a guy that scratches and claws for his victories. I mean, he's if he can't just go right through you, he's a dog, and we've seen him in plenty of dog fights. And Hakeem Dawodo, he's a guy that allows his opponents into close fights. He allows his opponents into fights where a lot of them are closer than they should be. He's done so in victory and defeat, and here, that's the story here. Hakeem Dawodo, first of all, if he was more dangerous, he probably wouldn't go to so many close decisions. And if he was more active, he would really put a stamp on his performance and probably secure this victory and a few others along the way. But he allowed Cub into this fight. took his foot off the gas at the wrong moments. Cub put his foot on the gas, I should say, at the right moments. I really think that'd be a better way to, categorize this fight. It was Cub Swanson's veteran savvy, and he turned it up in the right moments, and of course was, in my opinion, the last man standing. Not that Hakeem was faded or whatever, but I thought Cub was pressing more in the end, and he ended up getting the nod. I was happy for him. You're always happy for the veterans, but it was a bad decision. Hakeem Dawodo definitely should have gotten the nod here, and it sucks to watch any fighter being denied his biggest victory, I think, maybe. Certainly as far as names go. So, it sucks for Hakeem, and for Cub Swanson, hey, you keep scratching and clawing, and when the ball bounces your way, whatever, I'll just salute you. So, close fight, but not close enough to go the wrong way, which it did, in my opinion. Brings us to Khalil Rountree versus Chris Daukaus, or Daukaus. Chris Daukaus, he's got no chin. He's still a fast striker. I thought he got off a nice combination early on against Khalil Rountree, and I'm sure Daukaus is still very dangerous and packs dangerous power at heavyweight or at light heavyweight. But Khalil Rountree definitely packs power at light heavyweight, and Daukaus' chin, it's gone. This is now 7 losses, I think, 6 of them by knockout, 4 consecutive knockout losses in the UFC. And it just really sucks for him, because I remember before the Derek Lewis fight, he had quit his job as a Philadelphia police officer. And he had over a decade on the job and whatever. So he had it all on the line here and took a gamble on himself, really trying to elevate himself as a fighter, quitting his job and going full time. But it didn't work out for him, And it's solely because of his chin. That's the only reason. Not that he's the perfect fighter everywhere else, and he never would have been defeated if he didn't have a bad chin, but it's the only reason he's been defeated 4 times straight, and his professional career has fallen apart pretty quickly in front of our eyes. And I don't want to just harp on Chris Daukaus, because Khalil Rountree got it done. He was throwing great right hooks, check right hooks, and he ended up getting him out of there with a big straight left. Khalil Rountree has power. He's a very disciplined striker. I think he thought he hurt Chris a few times, and he wasn't chasing him or anything. He was very patient, knowing his technique and his speed and power would get the job done, and it didn't take too long. Got him out of there at the end of round 1, and then called for a main event. Which, you know what? He's on a 4-fight winning streak. Say what you will about the Jacoby decision and whatever the fuck else. But despite the level of competition and the bad chin on this guy and the bad decision here, he's won 4 consecutive fights in the UFC, and he's a very exciting fighter. It's a logistical issue for main eventing a UFC event. They only do 40 a year, whatever it is. That's a lot. But still, it's a finite amount of main events, and I do think Khalil Rountree is in the realm. I just don't know if he's going to get it. Of course, if he does get a main event, it's probably got to be against somebody that can complement his style. Not that they want to give him a toss-up and a layup so he can win, but Khalil Rountree is a very exciting fighter on the feet. That's his reputation, and if he's got the right matchup, it could be enticing enough to main event. Even though I have seen his fight against Michal Oleksiejczuk, which sounds great on paper. They don't always pan out, but you know what I mean. He's got potential, and hey, 4 in a row, he's got a shot. Brings us to Yasmin Lucindo versus Polyana Viana. Polyana Viana is a round 1 monster, and she gave it a good go in round 1. She was cracking her, looked really sharp, but then she took her down and didn't get much done on the ground, Polyana Viana. Everybody that's good off their back is good on top. Most of them, the overwhelming majority, are better on top. But Polyana Viana, she's much more dangerous from her back. So even though it boded well for her and her chances getting Yasmin down in round 1 after, busting her up a little bit, it just wasn't going to produce a finish. And then Yasmin Lucindo ended up getting her down, and Yasmin was better on top, better ground and pound, heavier on top, and of course better passing. And she ended up passing. She landed in round 2, landed a big shot, takedown to control, passed, and got the arm triangle choke. That's the second time Polyana's been submitted. This is much more, conventional, where Yasmin got her down and went through her guard, and passed and got the finish with the arm triangle. The other one was to Veronica Hardy, formerly Veronica Macedo, and that was with an armbar from the guard. Macedo, or Hardy, is very dangerous off her back. But Polyana Viana here was just straight up out-grappled by Yasmin Lucindo. Lucindo is very young, still a little sloppy in my opinion, a little vulnerable maybe, but she's a very healthy girl, and she's got a very good, well-rounded skill set. And here she is, the second person to go through Polyana Viana and get her out of there. Made her tap, and got a fantastic victory that certainly belonged on the main card. Lucindo's had a few fights on the main card already. She's definitely got a lot of promise. And for Viana, she's worth keeping around on danger alone. When she wins, it's a first-round finish, knockout or submission. She's just one of those action fighters, kind of like Terrence McKinney, to be frank, even though she doesn't always fall apart later. When she loses, it's much more likely to be by decision. But here was the rare exception where she got tapped out, which just makes it a sweeter victory for Yasmin Lucindo. Brings us to AJ Dobson versus Tafon Nchukwi. AJ Dobson, I thought, steadily outpointed Tafon Nchukwi, although I'll admit early on I thought Tafon's power was evident. And like I always say, power scores points, and he was scoring a lot of points. Just visible and audible leg kicks. And they were definitely doing something, but they never really became the story of the fight. Dobson was throwing leg kicks. It was a battle of lead leg kicks versus power kicks. And then the hand started to play a role. And I thought AJ Dobson had better boxing. He was the faster boxer. And he ended up outpointing Tafon Nchukwi and ripping him to the mat. I thought in the end it was clear. AJ Dobson got the better of Tafon. Tafon, he's a guy that I speculated has a weak chin, or maybe it's headed there. And his chin held strong here. But what came back to bite him in the ass was that bit of Dawodo he's got in him, where he's not the most active fighter. He's slow, steady, patient, and powerful. And I know it's a way of managing his cardio, but here he let Dobson become the active fighter, and he lost the decision pretty clearly here. AJ Dobson gets a solid win. That guy's got now one victory in the UFC. This was his first win, but he's shown promise before that, and when he's lost, his durability's been there. So he's just getting going, and this was a big win for him. Scratched and clawed, and in the end, left no doubt. Got a solid decision victory. Josh Fremd beat Jamie Pickett. This was about how I expected the fight to go. Jamie Pickett, he's all right, but he's not that dangerous. I feel like if he was more dangerous, he could have hurt Josh Fremd on the feet, because Josh Fremd, I don't know, I have a little doubt in his durability and his chin. But also just, technically, if both guys are healthy, I think I said Josh Fremd absolutely outpoints Jamie Pickett, and that's what happened. Josh Fremd, I thought, was just better everywhere, better wrestler. And Jamie Pickett, he's a limited guy. It's not always going to look like the Bo Nickel fight, where, it's that obvious that, that fight, if every fight looked like that, you'd say this guy never belonged in the UFC. He's beaten some guys in the UFC, Lariano Staropoli and whatever, Lariano Staropoli. He's never beaten anybody in too exciting fashion, but he's a capable guy, just bottom of the barrel, and I think this fight might send him packing. Josh Fremd's a guy with the future, in my opinion. Josh Fremd, he's impressed me in a lot of different ways. I have a few doubts about, his overall durability because of the way he's lost. But offensively, he's got it, whereas Jamie Pickett doesn't. Jamie Pickett wins, it's neutralizing you, really. At the UFC level, I should say. Outside the UFC level, yeah, he can destroy cans. But inside the UFC level, he is the can. Not the shit on him. So, tough loss for Jamie Pickett. And for Josh Fremd, he did what he needed to do. And he, again, shows promise. Great win for Josh Fremd. Or good win for Josh Fremd. That brings us to Marcus McGhee versus JP Buys. Marcus McGhee is 2-0 in the UFC now, and he's looked fantastic. This win wasn't as good, in my opinion, as the Journey Newsom win, but he still got a first-round knockout here. So it's tough to be better than that, but it's just his debut was so fucking perfect, winning by submission over the black belt and everything. But here, he showed that, you know, he's dangerous, got good athleticism, really tough to wrangle. JP Buys definitely wanted to take him down. And on the outside, he was, again, the faster striker, the better athlete, and the guy with the better chin. And JP Buys just couldn't take it. He couldn't take it. It's his biggest weakness moving forward. I don't know if he's going to be moving forward in the UFC, but I can tell you if this guy loses another 5 fights, and I hope he doesn't lose that many, but if he does lose 5 fights, at least 4 of them are by knockout. It's his primary weakness, and a guy like Marcus McGhee has shown enough where that's the result that should have happened, and it did. So, great win for Marcus McGhee, and a really cool speech at the end. You know, I don't like when guys get too sentimental and whatever the fuck, but he just expressed gratitude. He's grateful. He's aware that, you know, not everybody gets to do what he's doing, and he said he'd be grateful in defeat, which is pretty cool. So I'm a fan of the guy. Solid victory there. You know, again, even if it's a guy that's not in the UFC soon enough, it's a first-round knockout. Brings us to Terrence McKinney versus Mike Breeden. Terrence McKinney, he's a first-round monster. First-round monster. That's true for every single one of his victories, aside from one, which is a third-round heel hook. But he overwhelmed Mike Breeden. Mike Breeden's a guy that should be, on paper, more submittable, but he's never been submitted. He's got a few losses via finish, and they're all via knockout. 3, I believe, now. It's just, you know, on paper, it made sense. Terrence McKinney, even though he's vulnerable on the feet, he's vulnerable cardio-wise and chin-wise, but he's as dangerous as anybody in round 1. In round 1, he's Vitor Belfort. And he went through Mike Breeden, Mike Bernardo, rest in peace. And he beat Mike Breeden up, really beat him up. The punches were the main story, but of course he was beating him up with knees in between and elbows, and just overwhelmed him. I forget how long it went. It was like a minute or whatever, but yeah, he steamrolled him. Another first-round victory for the first-round monster. And then he called for a fight in Boston in 6 days. And someone said that's next week. And he said, all right, fuck that. But it sounds like he wants to get going again. I love that. Terrence McKinney wasn't knocked out against Nazim Sadikov. If he was knocked out, I would be telling him to sit down. But here, he came back, got a victory 3 weeks later, whatever it was. And now he's looking to get right back in there. I'm hoping he's healthy, his fucking hands are healthy, and I want to see him make a quick turnaround, because win or lose, he's one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC. I know it's disrespectful to use the term glass cannon, but as a fight fan, I couldn't think of a more respectful term, as, you know, as far as entertainment value goes. So he's must-see TV, and when he wins, it's more exciting than when he loses, and that's what we saw here. Just steamrolled him. Speaking of which, Isaac Dulgarian steamrolled Francis Marshall. This wasn't quite as easy as it was on the regional scene in his other 5 fights, which, again, those 5 fights all look the same. You know, there's a few little differences, but they're pretty much identical performances. And this one was just like a longer version of that. Isaac Dulgarian got on top of Francis Marshall, and he had good enough ground and pound to maintain top position for the first half of the round. But I remember thinking, oh, there's no way this one's going to end in round 1. And then he started passing to the other side. He was trying to pass to the right. Then once he started passing to the left, he started passing and found a little hole in the ground game there, I guess, and went right through Francis Marshall. In the end, it doesn't look too different from his regional fights against guys that are not at Francis Marshall's level. But he got him out of there late round 1, ground and pound, and looked incredible. This is just another performance in which Isaac Dulgarian looks perfect. He's on the path to be Nurmagomedov at this point. I know he's not going to be, but I'm saying he has not had one shitty moment. I got to rewatch the fight. Maybe Marshall hit him on the feet or something, but pretty much his entire career has been perfect so far. So I didn't get my wish, which was to see Dulgarian in round 2 and especially in round 3. And I wanted to see him handle some adversity, face some adversity. But at the same time, it's pretty cool watching a guy that destroyed 5 guys on the regional scene come into the UFC, level up, come in as an underdog, probably for the first time in his career, and the fight doesn't look all that different. So, excellent win for Isaac Dulgarian. Excellent debut. Just fantastic. And, yeah, for Francis Marshall, this sucked. This might prove to be to get better with age as a loss. You know, if Isaac Dulgarian is as good as he seems like he could be. But still, getting overwhelmed in round 1, yeah, that's a pretty tough loss. And again, this could prove to just be a stylistic nightmare where Isaac Dulgarian's that dominant of wrestling force and Francis Marshall never really had a shot. But yeah, great win for Isaac, tough loss for Marshall. Brings us to Martin Buday. Buday. I'm inclined to say Buday, but I know it's Buday. And he steamrolled Josh Parisian. This I did not see coming. I thought Buday would have won. I thought he would have been stronger. I thought that would have been the primary difference maker, stronger in the clinch. But it proved to be the difference maker early. In round 1, like the first half of round 1, he just steamrolled Josh Parisian. Parisian was ripped to the mat like it was nothing. He actually tried to rip Buday to the mat, and you could just see the strength disparity right in that moment. And even before that, Buday was busting him up on the feet. Had him hurt, kind of chasing him around, had him staggering a little bit. And, yeah, just overwhelmed him. And then on the ground, you know, I think he could have gotten the victory with ground and pound. But instead, he found the Kimura. Second time Parisian's been tapped, I think, and it was with a Kimura the first time. I think it was the guy Brett Martin or whatever. And I believe it's a second submission for Buday, and it's also a Kimura. So it's probably not that big a coincidence, but I'm not going to harp on it. Martin Buday went right through him. And very few guys have gone right through Josh Parisian. Really, nobody has. Not in the UFC. He's lost, and he's been outpointed and outgrappled and beaten down the stretch. But Martin Buday separated himself from those other guys. And that's pretty cool, because Buday, before this, he had gone to 3 consecutive decisions. One of them being a technical decision. But those are his 3 fights in the UFC. They're all decisions, and they were 3 out of his 4 decisions throughout his whole career. So it looked like he was trending towards being a decision fighter. And you know what? He might be. He seems pretty good. He's a good zombie, a reliable zombie. But here, he wasn't a zombie. Looked like he was a zombie that was given like smelling salts or something that he snapped out of it. And he was really aggressive and steamrolled a guy that's pretty damn tough. So, great win for Martin. Tough loss for Josh Parisian. I feel like I say that every time. Jacqueline Amorim. I guess you could say she kind of steamrolled Montserrat Ruiz, even though it took her like 12 minutes or 13 minutes to get the finish. 13 minutes, probably. Jacqueline Amorim came really close to getting a finish in round 1. I don't know if that's a 10-7, but I wrote down 10-7, and I wrote it down because that may not be my score, but it's a possibility. I wouldn't hold it against anybody for scoring that 10-7. She just has an incredibly strong mount, really incredible control, and Ruiz does not. She's not a great grappler there. And Jacqueline Amorim was so heavy on top, beat the shit out of her. The ground and pound was enough for the 10-8, but the arm bar she had her in was incredibly tight. That arm bar at the end of round 1 was so tight, and She was just working her over. This was never really much of a fight. Same thing happened in round 2. And then in round 3, Montserrat Ruiz crashed into a takedown somehow. I don't think it was a conventional takedown. I think it was some crash or whatever. Ended up on top and held top position to her credit. But then she was swept and pounded out within like 20 seconds, 10 seconds. So she gave it a good enough effort, Montserrat Ruiz. You know, just whatever, trying to survive. She showed a lot of heart, but she was overwhelmed here by Jacqueline Amorim. This was a mismatch, every bit the mismatch we thought it could have been. And Jacqueline Amorim, even when things maybe started to turn or whatever, she was still so technically superior that she got the finish anyway. Really cool of her to get the finish in round 3, because even though the fight was, she was up fucking 20 to fucking 15 or whatever, she was gassing in her one loss to Sam Hughes. She gassed, and that was the only strike against her. You know, going into this fight, I said I'd be interested in seeing how she looks in round 3. You know, if she has a good round 1, and then she's out of gas, she could, Ruiz could take over the fight or whatever. And that did not happen. Yeah, she found herself on top and whatever, but Amorim hit the sweep and got her out of there anyway. So, much like Andre Petrosky getting that 3rd round TKO over Michael Gilmore. That may not be the most impressive victory, but that answered a lot of questions that he needed to answer. Because he was, when he was coming off the Ultimate Fighter, he had a weak gas tank. He said, I just want to go past the 7-minute mark. And he ended up getting a 3rd round finish. It's very impressive in that way. Maybe not the best competition for these fighters, but Jacqueline Amorim had one doubt going against her, and she answered that doubt with a 3rd round finish. Great win for her. Damon Blackshear beats Jose Johnson. This was awesome. Damon Blackshear ripped him to the mat. I mean, first they were throwing down for a little bit. He threw down just enough to suck Jose Johnson into the grappling match. And then once he hit that takedown, it was on. And actually, Jose Johnson scrambled out of the first one, I believe. But then Damon Blackshear ripped him back to the mat. And Damon Blackshear had incredible control. He had a hook in once he took his back. And then he kept fighting for the 2 hooks. Jose Johnson was defending one side, then the other. And at one point, Damon Blackshear stopped fighting for 2 hooks and said, I'm just going to sit down on this one here. And ate that elbow, locked up a twister, and hit the 3rd twister in UFC history. Phenomenal victory for Damon Blackshear. Totally deserved the bonus, and then some. He hit the twister, which, if you don't know, Eddie Bravo, Joe Rogan's friend, invented the twister, 25 years ago, whatever. And a whole new series of grappling moves and whatever. Just a whole new, grappling series. But that move is very tough to hit. That's why it's only been hit 3 times. The Korean Zombie, Bryce Mitchell, 2 very crafty grapplers, and now Damon Blackshear puts himself in that league. Great win for him, and you can't say this was cardio. Jose Johnson took the fight on like no notice, but this was a round 1 submission loss. This was not, in round 3, you could totally attribute it to taking the fight on short notice. In round 2, you could speculate, but in round 1, there can be no argument. He was just bested technically by Damon Blackshear. Damon Blackshear, yeah, he hasn't had the best start to his UFC career, but I think he's going to be around for a long time. He's incredibly durable, really, really tough to get out of there, which helps him. And he's a crafty fighter with a lot of skills. So, great fucking win for him. And that brings us to Luana Santos versus Juliana Miller. Luana Santos just hurt Juliana Miller. Juliana came out of the gate with a lot of fire. She was leading the dance, pressuring Luana. But then Luana cracked her with 1 shot, and that was just the beginning of the end. Juliana Miller was on ice skates, and she never really recovered. But I'll say this, Luana Santos definitely needs to work on her stand-up technique. She was doing a lot of clawing and pawing, and I'm some fucking novice. I don't know how to throw strikes, but I know what I see. And Luana Santos definitely looked like a grappler throwing strikes there. She needs to sharpen up her technique, and she's still very young in her career. I don't expect her to be perfect and look like fucking Adesanya out there. But in that moment, I think she could have found a finish a lot quicker with better shots, sharper technique, no clawing and pawing and pushing, but sharp hooks and whatever, and ripping them to the body. Shot placement is everything when your opponent is on the ropes or against the cage, so to speak. But nevertheless, Juliana Miller looks a lot more fragile as a fighter. She did not look good at all against Veronica Hardy. And here, I don't know which loss looked worse, but we've learned a lot about her in the last 2 fights. And yeah, I don't know if she's going to be hanging around the UFC for so long. She might be one of the quickest Ultimate Fighter winners to wash out. But Luana Santos, she's a grappler first and foremost, but she's shown on occasion, a few occasions, she can crack. I told you I forget who it was, but I knocked down somebody outside the UFC. And here, I don't know if she knocked down Juliana Miller, but the power was the story of the fight here. She cracked her, and then that was the beginning of the end. Luana Santos, really impressive victory. Again, I don't want to harp on her technique. Oh, she's got shitty technique or whatever. She's a young girl grappler and very little MMA experience as a pro, and I'm sure she's going to be getting better. But aside from that, it's hard to criticize a first-round TKO win like this. Damn near perfect, excellent debut, and a win over an Ultimate Fighter winner, which even if she kind of fades away pretty soon or whatever, it's still a great way to make your debut. Like, share, subscribe, all that horseshit. Check out my other videos.